Hey guys, welcome back to Vertical Momentum. I'm your host, Richard Kaufman. Guys, this is going to be a fun episode. They say don't ever meet your heroes. Well, that's BS because this gentleman is one of my heroes and somebody I've looked up to for many years. He's a friend of the family. He's also retired Lieutenant Colonel, Air Force, 20 plus years, an acclaimed author, uh, and a podcast host, one of my favorite podcasts, new podcasts that I listen to every episode, and just somebody that I really love. And we're going to hop into that. But Antony, I just want to say, brother, welcome to the show. I'm so grateful that we finally got a chance to get together.
Richard, thank you so much for having me. It tickles me to know that we're going to be talking because basically we're family.
Yeah. And, I got to give a big shout out to your beautiful wife and your beautiful children. That's one thing I love about you is not only are you a veteran, but I think the best title you've probably ever held was father and husband. So I just want to say, I want to give a big shout out and love to them.
Thank you.
So before I got a traumatic brain injury, so if I don't ask the question, I'll forget. What is your definition of resiliency?
Resiliency. When I think of resiliency, I think of somebody who's able to bounce back from difficulties in life. When life kind of knocks you down, somehow being able to get back up and not give up. I think that's probably it. And I think you capture it really well, even in your intro, totally awesome intro commercial.
Thank you. My friend William put that together. He's also another veteran. And anybody that works for us, 100% veteran, 100% of the time. See you right now, other podcast host, Lieutenant Colonel in the military. People would probably think, oh, it's all been unicorns and rainbows and fairy dust. But, you had to deal with some serious issues when you were growing up. So if you mind hopping in the Wayback Machine, tell us a little bit about where you come from, where did you grow up, and how did you become the force that you are today?
Well, I grew up in New Jersey, not far from you, and typical middle class family. My dad was a school teacher, actually, a middle school teacher. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. Had an older brother and sister, and went to Catholic school in Clifton, New Jersey, St. Philip the Apostle parish. And, I think it was just a typical childhood. Probably the first real challenge that came up in our lives was when my dad had a heart attack when I was 7. And he wound up being sick with heart disease for the next 5 years and died when I was 12 in 7th grade. And obviously my Ernie and Lynn, my elder siblings, were just in their teen years. So that's a tough time for a kid to lose a parent and for a mom to become a widow. Yeah.
So, okay. So I grew up in an abused household. I had my first drink at 12. I was a full-blown alcoholic by the age of 13. But for me, my solace was books. I got 15 books going. I'm reading at today's time. I'm only a 9th grade dropout, but I've read over 6,000 books. Wow. So books became my solace. So when you're a young kid, 7, 8, 10, going through this stuff, what was your solace? Did you have a go-to thing to do?
I guess I was kind of a nerdy kid. I think I was also a reader. That's going to sound stupid. I used to, my mom's house, had something we called down below is what we called it. It was just basically, an area where there was open fields and woods and this kind of thing. I used to go down and just kind of play imagination games, run around shooting at trees, climbing up, trees like I was an elf in the Lord of the Rings or something. And, I think in some ways that was probably, an escape for me as a young kid.
And now, your older brother, Ernie, somebody I love very, very much. I think he's the human Tasmanian devil. He's always like, rah, 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 rah. So he's always on the go, always moving. And were you guys, how far in age were you guys, and how did you guys get along growing up?
We're 3 to 4 years apart. I'm the baby of the family. Ernie had his good qualities as a big brother, but I also was the annoying little brother that I think he didn't love to have around. Like, who would? If you're like a 15-year-old, 16-year-old kid, who wants their little bratty, nerdy brother around? So Ernie had his life going on, and of course with Andrea, his wife of many, many years now. But no, he was all right. He was a typical big brother.
And I've known Ernie probably since they started dating when they were like 17. So Andrea and Ernie's always been in my life. He's somebody that I looked up to, and I still admire today. So now he went to be a mechanic, and then he went the business way. What made you decide to go the military way? What was the thought process behind that?
Yeah, so I joined the military when I was basically 20, and I had dropped out of college to do so. I spent 2 years at Seton Hall University, but the reality is I have to rewind a little bit further because I was on the trajectory, went to high school, did really well, graduated second in my class, had a full scholarship to Seton Hall University, academic scholarship. But what wound up happening was, as a teenager, 17, 18 years old, got my girlfriend pregnant. And so that was, a major event, especially in the 1980s, when it wasn't quite the cool thing to do like it is nowadays. But yeah, we were teenage pregnancy, and that definitely brings a challenge to it. And a lot of challenges come to your life when you're having to go to school. And thankfully her family was very supportive and didn't like kill me. And and so for 2 years I sort of did the college commuting thing, and we got married. And at some point there's too many other things, probably too many other variables to bring up, but at some point I decided it would make sense to drop out of college. Which may not have been the most brilliant thing to do on scholarship, but that's what I did. And I wound up working full time for a while. This was right before Desert Shield and Desert Storm in 1990, 91. And at some point I realized that, this wasn't getting me anywhere. And so Desert Shield was going on, and, Lisa and I were married at that point with 2 kids, Beauty and Mercy. And we realized, what, I don't know that I'm going to get back to college on the path I'm on. And maybe, we've got a need now. There was patriotism in the country. And, I thought maybe I should join the military. Maybe that'll give me an opportunity. And that's exactly what I did. I joined the Air Force as a firefighter, actually, and went to basic training in January of 1991.
Oh, obviously, and something that my heart is, in my house, we bleed black, we bleed blue, we bleed red, we bleed green. Our family 100% supports veterans and first responders. So thank you also for that. But now let's hop back, because I want to, I lost about 80% of my vision about 3 years ago. But now I'm able to hear words and connect on certain words. And, you said that, you joined the military, but then you're a kid having a kid. And you said, your dad passed at an early age. So a lot of it, you had to figure out how to be a dad without really having a dad, because he passed so young. And I think a lot of us struggle with that, because there are no real books that could say, well, here, this is how my daughter home, didn't know what to do. I got a human being that I got to take care of. I don't know how to do this. I never had a father. So for me, it was a very scary thing. So I couldn't imagine not only, having a kid as a kid, because 19, 20 years old, you're still a kid. So what was that like, having a kid and being that young?
Yeah, I said I thought we should call this show, Faith and Resiliency and Teens, partly because I write that teen series, but partly because, I can identify, as a teenager, I didn't come from a bad family. My mom and dad were supportive. They weren't abusive. It was a loving family, not a perfect family, but a loving family. And I grew up as the baby, so I was the spoiled brat in the family. So I didn't have any of the baggage that you had to deal with, for instance. And I was a goody two shoes as a kid. But one of the things that I did going to Catholic school my whole life, even through high school, was for whatever reason, I connected with the faith, and it was always something that attracted me. And I think that honestly is the thing that got me through what otherwise were a lot of really big curveballs that I got thrown in life. Many of my own, shooting myself in the foot type stuff, but ultimately, I think my faith was what got me through. And during the time in my life that you're talking about now, it was difficult because on the one hand, I was like in youth group and all this stuff. And then I got my girlfriend pregnant. So obviously, what kind of great youth group kid was I if I was doing that? And so there was sort of like this, ambivalence in my life. On the one hand, I, was, practicing the faith. On the other hand, I wasn't, and I was rationalizing, things and this kind of thing. But at the end of the day, when all the chips kind of fell in, I was able to kind of land back on my faith. And, that's, God is a forgiving God. And because of that, it allowed me to sort of say, all right, so I want to do this the right way. And, how am I going to make good on, the life that I've, created here, and my beautiful, beautiful baby, my beautiful wife, just, given so many gifts, and how do I be a good father? And honestly, I was reading books about Christian books, really about being a good father. In fact, there was one book I read, which was appropriately called How to Be a Good Father. That was sold by a Christian bookstore. And I remember making a poem out of the book. There were like every chapter had like a highlight, and I sort of made myself a poem, How to Be a Good Dad. Is actually, I think, what the book was called. And I kind of would look at that regularly and try to live up to it, even though I never did. At least I had something to shoot for.
All right. So now, like you said, you've done. We don't tell war stories here. That's something we don't do. But you did over 20 years in the military, in Air Force. And now, like I was taught or was told, if you didn't go through a divorce, have a DUI or a bankruptcy, you really didn't have a great military career. I did all three of them. So, but a lot of us, when we get deployed, whether it's the mother or the father that's in the military, even first responders, police officers, have an 80% divorce rate. So if somebody's listening to us right now that is either going to be deployed or is deployed, how do you keep your marriage strong while the parent is deployed? Because I'm sure that's something that a lot of people don't really think about it. But that when I got to, my wife had to play both roles. She had to do two jobs. So, then when you get back home, you try to get back into being the father or the mother, and you're kind of like the odd man out because it's everybody kind of just changed the whole world. And now when you're trying to get back into it, it's kind of really weird. So talk to us about that, because I think that's a very important aspect of military life.
Yeah. Now we've been married now. It'll be 35 years next year. And there've been some ups and downs and some difficult times in that. 21 of those years were in the military. And there were periods of time, both in and out of the military, we've been separated. Actually, our longest separations have actually been in the last 4 years, believe it or not, because although my wife has been staying here in Jacksonville, Florida, for 3 years, I was commuting back and forth to Dallas, Texas, working at a law school, teaching there. And this last year, I've been commuting down to Naples, Florida. So, I've been living more of a military lifestyle with being separated from family in the last 4 years than probably in my entire military career. Because unlike so many of my brothers and sisters in arms, I wasn't one of those people who got deployed for long periods of time away from my family. The military required me sometimes to be away from my family when I was eventually. So, okay, I started as a firefighter. I finished my degree in the military, thank God, thanks to the Air Force tuition assistance program. I became an officer. I was an intel officer for a few years. And then the Air Force actually sent me to law school, to the University of Florida in Gainesville, which was how I made my Florida connection. And that was my job for 3 years, to go to law school. But I had my family with me while I was in law school. And then I spent the rest of my time as a JAG. And part of that time, I did travel around a lot doing cases. So I was separated from my family for periods of time, but not the way that a lot of our deployed folks are now. But what I can say, over 35 years of times where I've been separated, I think you need to be realistic about the separation. And nowadays, you can stay in touch, thankfully. And I think you need to stay in touch. I think you need to stay close to your faith, because when you're separated, you're lonely. There's, huge periods of time where, you're apart and you might not have that contact. So that, the separation itself is difficult. And I think if you lack some sort of a center, a faith center, it's a lot harder to not sort of, fall into pitfalls. But then, as you mentioned, when you come back home, that is something I've experienced throughout my marriage. Is when you've been separated, even just for a week or two, and you come back home, your spouse has had to be at home dealing with the kids and their whole life, and you're just coming in and out of their lives, and that's very difficult. And for the military person or the person who's been away, sometimes you don't really fully appreciate what that is. And I think you need to stop and appreciate it. And I think you need to be realistic and know, there's going to be some bumps as we, get back together again and learn to be in each other's company when we've been separated for so long. I think you have to have realistic expectations and try to be understanding and forgiving, because you're going to say things, you're going to blow up, people are going to be stressed out, and sometimes you can't blame your spouse if they've been deployed. But, you got to take it out on somebody. And sometimes it's your spouse who's there.
All right. So I want to hop deep into your military transitioning. But first, I want to thank our sponsors. You guys know, if I don't use a company, I will not have them as a sponsor. And there's been many times where my car was broke down along the side of the road, and I called Andrea and Ernie, come pick it up, help me out, fix it. And once they fix it, it never broke again. So guys, if you are in Bergen County, especially Hackensack, check out ENA's friendly service. ENA stands for Ernie, his brother, and Andrea, my cousin. I love my cousin. And they have an amazing company down on Green Street in Hackensack. If you need any work done on vehicles or even big trucks, they do all kinds of work, and they guarantee their work. So make sure you check out ENA's service. Also, if you're in the area and you love if you like Italian food, homemade, authentic Italian food, there's a company out here in Lyndhurst called Muriel's Trattoria. Amazing Italian food. It's all made with love, and they're actually their parents came off the boat from Italy, and the mom is still cooking in the kitchen. So definitely check out Muriel's down below. So now let me ask you, because I try not to curse on my show, but sometimes I have to get my point across. I think we're interview like 1,000 or something like that. And it seems like anybody that's ever been in the military, or even if they're a first responder, everybody has a shelf date. And a lot of us don't look at us having shelf dates, meaning, eventually we're going to have to pull off the uniform. Eventually we're going to have to step off base. And unfortunately for a lot of us, like myself, once you step off base, the military doesn't give a crap about you. Your phone stops ringing, you lose the camaraderie, and you lose your mission. And a lot of us end up looking at a bottle of vodka and a weapon in our mouth. So what was your transitioning like, and how far ahead did you start planning for your transitioning?
So because I was so young when I joined, and the benefit of that, of course, you pointed out some of the downsides of that. You're having to be separated from family when you're young and immature still, and growing up and this kind of thing. But one of the benefits of that was after 21 years of service, I was in my early 40s. Now, although I didn't deploy a bunch of times, what I did do was have to move with my family every 2 to 3 years. And I had 5 kids throughout, most of my military career, and it was starting to get pretty tough on the family, as you probably know, and I know a lot of your listeners know. Even just the having to pick up your family and move from Florida to Colorado to California to Texas to Virginia to Maryland to, Georgia, back to Maryland. I mean, that's kind of the stuff that we were doing. And this is every 2 to 3 years. I know we were homeschooling for a while, which helped a little, but it became really tough on the family. So when it got time to head towards retirement, we knew it was time to get out. And my wife was very much in support of getting out because it was just getting too rough. We still had teenagers, and it was just getting too tough on the family. So I knew early on, that I was going to not be staying in for 30 or 40 years. And I sort of was looking forward to a second career. I knew I'd be able to get out early enough to have a second career. So that's what I did. Somewhere in the middle of, my career, when I realized all of these things were going to happen, and I realized what I really wanted to do was teach at a law school if I could, I directed all of my extra efforts to make sure that I would, have all the boxes checked to be a competitive candidate when I retired to be able to teach. And so that's what I wound up doing. I jumped right out of the military, right into, literally, I retired on, July 31st, 2012. And I started at the first law school I taught at in Jacksonville, Florida on August 1st, 2012. So I really had no break in service. And I went from one community into another. Now, the other cool thing was law students all want to be JAGs, it seems. And so I was immediately received into my law school, and it felt a lot like I never left the military because we had military recruiters coming to campus. I was talking to students constantly about the Air Force. I was prepping students to get into the JAG. I was kind of staying in touch. So in some ways, I never really felt like, I had that really hard break that a lot of our servicemen and women have when they get out. And the Air Force had been so good to me, and I didn't have a lot of the baggage that some folks get stuck with in their military careers, that I didn't have some of those really traumatic things to have to overcome. So it's not a very good transition story, except to say not everybody who transitions out of the military, has a horrible time of it. And I think, especially because I knew it was time to go, and because I was able to land in a really good place, and my wife was happy with where we landed, and so that worked out, thank God. And again, I really feel like all throughout this, I need to keep saying thank God and thanks to our faith, because there were many places along the way, in those 21 years where we were heading off the rails. No matter how good things seemed, there were lots of bad spots. And if it weren't for faith, I'm sure we would be one of the statistics of the 80% that you talked about.
Now, something I wrote it down and I forgot. I wanted to mention your mother is one of the most loved people I've ever met. And your mother means so much to me, because when I was going through my high, she was the only one that would invite me over for dinner or let me stay at her house and not having to worry about me robbing anything. She always invited me with open arms and always gave me hugs and kisses. So I just wanted to give a big shout out to your mom, and I really love her. And she, Mrs. K, I know you're probably not watching, but I love you and I will always love you. So I just wanted to give her the big shout out. I wanted to do it earlier, but I totally forgot. So now let's talk about teenagers. Because I got a 20-year-old, I got an 18-year-old about to go to college. I got an 11-year-old that's going on 18. And also in my town, I'm in charge of, we used to be called the DARE program. And I'm realizing as I'm going to more courses and more classes that on average, 5,000 adolescents attempt suicide every day in the United States. So that's why I think the next part is going to be the most important part of what we talk about. Talking about resiliency with our children and our teens. And this is something that I know you're really you're working on and harping on. So talk to us a little bit about resiliency in teenagers.
Well, I mean, I think just what you were saying is a great segue into this, right? So if you look around today, I mean, it was tough to be teens when we were kids in the 80s. And it's only gotten harder. The free availability of drugs, the social media and constant, pressure of that kids are dealing with. The fact that our society has gotten further and further away from God, and kids are less and less catechized or brought up in any sort of faith at all, or even any belief in God. This creates a major void in kids' lives. I mean, it's hard enough just to be a kid and to be a teenager coming of age and trying to figure out who you are. Not to mention, we won't even necessarily go into, the whole gender dysphoria issues and, all those issues. Kids are confused naturally, and our society is not doing them any favors today. And the more that there's that void in their lives that, St. Augustine is famous for saying, we all have a hole in our hearts that only God can fill, or something along those lines. It's not a quite great quote, but that's the gist of what he was saying. And we've taken all of that away from our kids these days. And so they're filling that void with everything else, their peers, their social media, TV, drugs, sex, the occult, whatever it is. And it's tough to overcome that. And then, because you were, had this troubled teen past that you were describing, you understand just how easy it is for kids to get wrapped up in that. And to me, it's more miraculous as I'm looking at you with admiration going, wow, to be able to beat that, is to me the much more admirable thing to anything I've ever done. But anyway, so I think it's important as parents, grandparents, teachers, to try to get our kids to recognize there's more to life than this shallowness that we see around us in the world. And really, to me, the only thing that is ultimately going to really help kids through this is if they get in some semblance of, faith, or in touch with some higher power, right? Because as even if you went through AA or all that, if you don't recognize a higher power, this world can be a very despairing place. There's only the world around you, and that's how you lead to despair, and that's how you lead to nobody cares about me, because you don't recognize that there is somebody who cares about you, and it's God. And you're not even told that anymore as kids. It's apparently something bad you're not supposed to tell kids about. So I'll stop there for the moment, because obviously we'll talk about my books and all that, but I would say, to me, if I was diagnosing the problem, it's the same problem we've always had, which is there's this void that we're all trying to fill in our lives, and kids nowadays are really being stuck with a really terrible bill that we've been giving them as a society for all sorts of reasons, that we know, because we've been living and seeing it around us and being shocked by it as we see some of this unfold.
Okay, but now something that I'm seeing a lot of, now I'm a 54-year-old male, so I'm an OG. That means old guy. But for me, I try to keep my fingers on the pulse of everything that's going on. And I could stand up in a room full of parents and say, show me your Snapchat app. They won't even know what I'm talking about half of the time. And their eyes glaze over. And I tell them, what is TikTok? Half of them don't even know what that is. So their children are on these apps, hanging. This is where they hang out, on Instagram, YouTube. And a lot of adults, they don't take the time to figure out, well, where are my children hanging out? What are they watching? What are they doing? So I think we have to get more, as a father, I have to get more involved with my children to find out what they're doing, instead of just letting them hanging out in a room watching YouTube and playing on social media all day. Are you seeing some of the same things that I am?
Well, yeah, and if you've listened to my podcast, I interview a lot of guests who talk about social media and this kind of thing, and that is the top thing they always say is you need to know what your kids are, getting into on the internet.
So where do you think I got that question from? From listening from listening to your podcast.
Oh, excellent, good. No, but I mean that's the reality. Is well, and we know like maybe people. Look, I'm 53 too, so it's not like I'm much younger than you. And I am aware of TikTok. I actually got a TikTok account last year to try to get on there a little bit to reach a younger audience. But you're right. I don't have Snapchat in that, but I know what those things are. And because I have teenagers and I hear them talking, I'm aware of that. But you're right. A lot of parents don't even know. But, those parents have their noses stuck in their phones on Facebook or Instagram or something, or they're watching Netflix and binging, and they're not taking the time to even bother figuring out what their kids are into, or they're terrified. They're too terrified to ask what their kids are into. And we've sort of taken on, this nanny idea that we'll let the internet and, Netflix raise our kids instead of ourselves because it's easier that way. And yeah, that's definitely a way to, for your kids to just go off, and maybe some of them will have good influences, but a lot of them are getting really bad influences, and it's not very hard to find. Like in our day, they talked about kids being exposed to pornography and how dangerous that is. Nowadays, it seems like try to find a kid who hasn't had hardcore pornography on their phone regularly, and that makes an impact on how people view themselves, how they view the world, how they view their own self-worth. That's part of that void that I'm talking about, that I feel like if we don't find a way to try to get kids, towards a faith, they're going to fill that void with some very terrible things.
And, also, I think, for me, I don't even remember who said it because I got so many quotes going on in my head, that anybody could ever hear you say is about the way you live. And I have a friend, and he smokes, drinks, takes edibles, and then he's wondering why his kids are smoking, drinking, taking edibles, and living the lifestyle, because he's telling them, do as I say, don't do what I do. But the kids are going to learn more by what they see than what they say. Do you believe in that?
Yeah, I mean, I do think sometimes that is a real truth. I also know, because I, as a person who interacts with a lot of religious folks, I know some very strong religious families where the parents weren't doing all those things, but their kids still got into drugs or still got into, and some of it is mental illness. I mean, that's definitely running rampant. Some of it is just the influences that are happening outside the home. Some of it could just be that the parents maybe are too strict and aren't relating to their kids, and so the kids are just going outside the home to get their modeling of these things. But yeah, I mean, what you described is definitely that do as I say, not as I do thing is a surefire way for your kids to not take you seriously, and that's very true, I think.
All right, so now, like I said, I have a 11-year-old girl, my baby doll, and I have an 18-year-old son, and I got a 20-year-old son. All three of them get hugs and kisses every time I see them. I tell them I love them. I tell my daughter, I love you. You're beautiful, because I find that I don't want her to have to go anywhere else to get that loving from a father. Because I found that people that I've talked to, a lot of women that grew up without a father or a distant father, they got into a lot of trouble when they were all looking for that fatherly love. And I think a lot of dads are afraid to go up and give their son a hug and a kiss and tell them they love it, because it's not masculine. It's not the man thing to do. But for me, I'm the same. I'm a goofy guy where I'm going to come up and give my hug. My cousins, anybody I know, they're all going to get hugs and kisses and especially my kids. And a lot of people look at me, you still kiss your 20-year-old boys? Yes. Yes, I do. And I tell them, I love you. I got your back. So talk to us a little bit about parenting styles.
Yeah, no, I think everything you said is spot on. I think you need to let your kids know that you love them. My wife is really the nurturing one in our family, which is not probably too surprising. Mothers often are. But I think you're right. There's a really important place for fathers, and kids need to know their fathers love them. I wish, I could say that, my relationship with all my kids was perfect. I try to always let them know I love them, but for whatever reason, the relationship with the mom was always the stronger one with my kids. But having said that, I think if you don't let your kids know, that you're proud of them, that you love them, and if you don't show them affection, you're right. There's terrible, horrible stories that you hear about kids who will go seek that affection elsewhere. But again, even sometimes in really strong families where the parents seem to be doing everything right, their kids sometimes are going to go astray. And so, I don't want parents to, always just be pointing the finger at themselves to blame, because, look, we're all doing the best we can. And like you said, I mean, like, here, you grew up in an abusive home. So how do you become a parent if you grow up in an abusive home? I mean, that's a huge challenge. And, it's a learning curve. And I'm sure there's going to be days where you're like, man, I really screwed that up. I didn't do it the right way today. And we can't go back and change the past. All we can do is keep saying, all right, this is resilience, right? This is what you're talking about. All you can say is, look, maybe I screwed it up yesterday. I need to get up today and try to do better at it. And I think that is resilience. And I think if a parent has faith, they're much more likely to be able to get back up, forgive themselves. I'm Catholic, so we get to go to confession. That's very helpful. I've used that throughout my life because I screw up a lot. So it's kind of nice to, feel that forgiveness and feel like, all right, clean slate, time to keep going back and get in the trenches and do it, try to do it better. And I'd like to say I'm doing it better now. But there's still days, and you just ask my wife, there's still days I screw it up regularly.
But something that, because I screw up a lot, but I'll say to my sons or my daughter, I'll pull them aside and say, listen, I'm sorry. I made a mistake. Please forgive me. And they forgive you. But I think once they see, wait a minute, even daddy makes mistakes. And when he's wrong, he admits it. So I'm going to do the same thing. And I think it's that whole trying to get over that macho thing. I'm not macho whatsoever. Even though if I get in a fight, I know how to kill somebody. But I'm not that macho guy. And I believe, the reason why men are taking their lives so much up to 55 veterans and first responders a day is because their friends are telling them, hey, man up, but that's not what a man is. Like for me, my Lord and Savior is Jesus Christ. Without him, I wouldn't be here today. But even in the Bible said that Jesus was meek, but he wasn't weak. The same Jesus that held the baby, that held the sheep, was flipping tables. So, a man, I think a man, the way a lot of people see a man is, it's not the way a man was actually meant to be. We're meant to have feelings. We're meant to care. We're meant to protect. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And look, there's all different types of men, right? I mean, like if you and I were in a room together, they'd be like, yeah, there's the more masculine one and there's the nerdy guy. And I get that, and that's fine. There's all different types. But like you said, what's really important is, I think what makes you a better man is to be able to have the courage to face up to yourself and your own mistakes. And it does make a difference, makes a huge difference if a parent or even a teacher, like I've done this. I remember there was one incident when I was teaching at the Air Force Academy, and one of my students called me out in class because I was actually breaking a policy that the Air Force Academy had in the classroom. And it was really embarrassing to me that the student had called me out like that. and I was really pretty upset at the student. But the next day, I actually came in and I apologized to the class, and I sucked it up and was like, you know what? That student was right. I was breaking a rule. I was like drinking coffee in the classroom when, the students weren't allowed to drink coffee, and I wasn't either, but I was. It was just bad modeling of that, and it was embarrassing to be called out, and humbling. But it makes a difference if you're willing to be man enough to sort of admit that you screwed up. I think I've probably made more progress with people after I've screwed up and then apologized after the fact than if I had just been like, well, whatever, he had no right to talk to me like that, and I'm just going to keep on with my life. People want to see not only that you're going to be the man, they want to see that you're willing to suck up mistakes that you make, and your kids want to see that too. Obviously, you want to minimize your mistakes, and you don't want to have to be apologizing all day and all night to your kids all the time. So there's probably a line there somewhere, but especially on the bigger things, I think it's important that you admit those.
All right, so now let me ask you a question, because when I wrote my book, which hit #1 twice, about addiction.
Congratulations on that, by the way. I know that is not an easy thing to do.
No, and the thing is, for me, it was very cathartic. It ripped open a lot of wounds that I had to, heal from, and I had to I call Andrea. I was like, "Cuz, did this really happen? Because I don't remember most of it. So you got to tell me, So for me, it was very cathartic, but it taught me a lot, about how to write, because obviously I didn't graduate 9th grade. I quit in 8th grade. So I don't know crap about English. So I'm not a #1 best-selling writer. I'm a #1 best-selling author. So talk to us about, writing your first book, and what was that experience like in writing the first one? Because every book is like a child. Like, I got a new book coming out. It's called Too Dumb to Quit. But that's going to be my second child. So what was it like, that first book, and what was the thought process?
So, I had to write a lot as a lawyer, a lot of nonfiction and boring legal stuff. But I always wanted to publish a novel. And I was finally in 2020 was really able to get that done. And I'll show you real quick, and then I'll answer your questions there. My series is called The Harwood Mysteries. And this was the first book. Where is it? There. Shadow in the Dark.
That's the one I got. That's
good.
The one
you got this one.
I have it upstairs. Yep.
Excellent. And hopefully your 11-year-old, will be perfect age, because this is really for 10 and up, good teenage, middle school, high school type book. Takes place in the Middle Ages, and it's about a boy who gets orphaned at an abbey in England in the 12th century, and he winds up having to solve these kind of spooky mysteries. It's kind of got a very Harry Potterish kind of a vibe, but it's historical fiction. It's meant to attract young readers into good stories. So it follows the series. Harwood Mysteries is book 1, Shadow in the Dark. Book 2 is The Haunted Cathedral. You can see there's my main character, Zan, and Lucy is another main character, and Christina is a third character who gets introduced here. So it's for boys and girls. Here they're solving, is this cathedral haunted by a ghost of a little girl or not? Book 3 is The Fire of Eden. That's that wizard-looking guy is a kind of an evil magician. And book 3 is sort of a jewel thief whodunit, who stole this jewel. And my main character, Zan, and Lucy have to figure out if this magician or one of the other characters is the thief. Book 4 is The Merchant's Curse. This just came out in October of last year. And in this one, Zan and Christina really are the two trying to figure out, is this kind of witchy woman a real witch? Has she cursed somebody who's dying? How do you break the curse, and all this kind of stuff? So you could see it's kind of got a lot of spooky vibe to it. And yeah, when that first book was done, when Shadow in the Dark came out, it really was, like you said, my baby. I'd been writing this thing for about 10 or 12 years, had gone through many versions of it, and had been edited and re-edited and written and rewritten. And when it finally came out, and I've been so blessed, Shadow in the Dark won like 6 different book awards, including several gold medals. Each of the other books have won at least one gold medal award. So I've just been, as an author, as you know, like you're always looking for validation, like, well, but is it any good? So to get that validation is great. And then, talking to parents and kids who, are reading the books. And I don't know if you or your kids have had a chance to read Shadow in the Dark, but I hope that if they haven't, they will, and that they'll enjoy it. But getting that kind of feedback, and I've actually been talking in schools lately to, classes that have, used the book in school to talk about the Middle Ages or faith, because there's some religious themes that kind of run through these books, because they're like coming of age books. So I want to tell you more about them, but let me pause for a minute and see what kinds of, other thoughts you might have.
No, and I love that, because I'm not a big fan. I love the first book. Like I said, I devoured it when I first got it. I'm not a big Harry Potter guy. So for me to read that book, I think that's like the only fantasy book I've ever read, period. Because I'm that's just not me. My kids are into Harry Potter, Star Wars, and I'm just like, I don't get it. But I think it's great. The content is great. It's very easy to consume. Because sometimes you'll get a book like some of the bigger authors like Tolkien and them. It's hard to read, because sometimes I'm like, I don't want to have to go to the dictionary to find out what they're talking about. But your stuff is very easy to consume, and it flows very easily. I think I read your book, in one sitting. So I think for children, or kids, teenagers, it's easy to follow. Is that something that you put the thought process into, that is easy to
takes a lot of work. Yeah, no, it takes a lot of work to make it that easy, because, I, as a lawyer, my natural inclination is to write, long, lengthy sentences with big words in them. And when you're writing fiction for youth, you have to really do the exact opposite. And it took years and years of sort of, fellowship from other writers and mentorship and working with editors to finally feel like I'm finally, in a groove where I understand what I'm doing and how to tell a good story. I go and talk to students at middle schools. By the way, if any of your listeners have a, especially a middle school class that wants an author to come talk to them, I love doing that. I've been doing that a lot lately. And I talk about storytelling and the hero's journey, which is, our main fiction storytelling template that we use as humanity. We've been using it for thousands of years in every type of story.
The funny thing is my book is called A Hero's Journey from
there
Darkness.
You go. You didn't even realize you were doing it. But yeah, that's a motif that we use for writing, and almost everything you watch and everything you read is some version of the hero's journey. And so once you start learning about storytelling, it makes it easier to tell a good story, because you kind of get the groove of it. But no, my books, though, like you said, I wanted them to be spooky. I wanted them to be easy reads. I wanted them to be exciting. They're not really fantasy, but they almost have a fantasy vibe to them. They're historical fiction, because I actually talk about history and historical events in the 12th century. But, they're also, we were talking about resilience, and we were talking about my own experiences in life. I draw from a lot of that in the books. There's a lot of loss in these books. Like in book 1, it's really about suffering and why do bad things happen to good people? Because, as you know, Zan winds up losing his family. These bandits attack his village, and so you've got this. He starts off as 11 years old. By now, I'm writing book 6, literally right before I came on your interview. I was finishing chapter 1 in book 6, and Zan is 15 years old in book 6. But in book 1, he's 11. And here he is. He's been orphaned. He loses his memory at the beginning of the book because he gets attacked by a bandit, and he doesn't know who he is or what happened to his parents. And there's a lot of sort of loss and suffering that he's dealing with, and it was through no fault of his own. And I try to tackle sort of the big questions in life, starting with, right from the start with this kid. Why is this happening to me? Why is there suffering in the world? And that's honestly the reasons. You're talking about people taking their own lives and this kind of, it's because they aren't able to, make sense of the world. They don't understand. They seem to think like there's not supposed to be suffering in the world, but in fact, we know that there is suffering. You talked about Jesus. Jesus died on a cross. He told us we were going to be suffering too. Carry your cross. And so there's some of that. It's understanding why there's suffering in the world. That's part of book one. But presenting that kind of a message in a kind of exciting historical fiction, fantasy-ish kind of a book that teenagers would enjoy is challenging to do. But I kind of feel like I think I finally got it right after like the 100th time rewriting the book.
And I always love to hear people talk about the fruits of the spirit, but they kind of forget long suffering is in there. That's the one that they kind of gloss over. And for me, my mindset changed because I'm hanging out with millionaires, billionaires, authors, athletes, and a lot of them, like my Ed Milet, he always talks about how, things happen for you. They don't happen to you. And that everything is a teachable moment. And instead of asking the world, God, why me? Ask why not me? Who am I so special that I'm not supposed to have any trials or tribulations?
Yeah, right. I mean, it says all things work together for good for those who love God. Like when my dad died when I was 12, actually one really cool story, which maybe Ernie and Andrew already told you, was, the night my father died, when we came back to the house, and we were getting ready for bed, there was a lit up cross. Sorry, finding my camera. There was a lit up cross and light on the wall that had never been there before. And we were like, what the heck is this? And, we finally figured out it was like one night light in one room and one night light in another room. We're just happened to be, but it has never happened before in the entire history of our house. And all of a sudden on the night our father died, here's the symbol of the cross, the sign of Jesus' suffering, as if God was there saying, I'm with you. I understand what it's like to be suffering. And that's a lot of what kind of goes into book one is, the characters recognizing, God is a suffering God. He understands our suffering, and good will come out of it in the end, even though it's tough to go through. If Jesus didn't suffer on the cross, he wouldn't have gotten to the resurrection either. And so we kind of have to go through our own, suffering, and, God will bring good out of it. When we got pregnant as teenagers, it was like, well, what good could come of that? But I've got these beautiful children and now grandchildren, and just, a life that I wouldn't trade for anything. But, you have to go through kind of the fire to, to get to that. And if people think, and if kids think their lives are going to be perfect, then they run into suffering and they're like, well, what's the matter with me? And why is life so horrible? I should just end it all. And that's the kind of despair that we really need to try to build resilience in them so they don't give into that kind of despair.
And, like for me, I'm on a lot of stages. I'm on a lot of podcasts. I speak a lot. And a lot of people ask me, well, Rich, what is your favorite verse in the Bible? For me, it's he wept. Because he felt pain. He felt sadness. Even when John got killed, he felt these things. So he knows how we feel. And a lot of people don't think about that. But when they're like, wait a minute, that's actually in there. He wept. Yes, it says he wept. So if he was struggling, especially in the Garden of Gethsemane when he was praying, Lord, take this from me. So if he suffered, who are we not to think that we have a right to suffer? You know what I mean?
Right. And that verse, he wept moments before he raised his friend Lazarus from the dead, but he was still weeping when he was confronted with the grieving sisters of Lazarus. So, he understands human grief, and he's lived it himself. And so I think, but those things, we look around the world today and people just, well, why is God doing this? And why is God letting people die and get cancer and, have terrorists blow things up? God must be a horrible God. It's because they're coming at it from a totally foreign view. That's not a Christian view for sure. It's not a faith-based view. And they're trying to make sense of God without understanding any of what God has said he is. And so I try to do that, in the books, and I try to tackle some big questions, in the books too. I want to, the second book, Haunted Cathedral, is about forgiveness. Zan is faced with the guy who killed his family, and he hates him and he doesn't want to forgive him, but he's trying to make sense of Jesus saying, love your enemies, and what happens if you don't forgive? And Zan hangs on to his hatred pretty much for the whole book. And we kind of see the results of that. And book 3 deals with the issue of pride. Zan gets kind of pride. Pride always comes before a fall. I understand that because I'm a proud man, and I've fallen a lot. So, but Zan has to learn kind of the hard way about, the sin of pride. And book 4, if you like the Old Testament, you like the book of Ecclesiastes. That's the one where King Solomon starts with vanity of vanities. Everything in life is vanity. Book 4 really looks at all of the passing things in this life that people put their trust in: money, fame, friends, good looks. And none of that stuff is going to get you anywhere in the end. And again, you see, like, in that kind of witchy mystery of the Merchant's Curse, Zan is seeing this unfold in the lives of different characters. So I try to build those kinds of messages into the books in a way that's very organic. And, but I think it's stuff we need to hear today, especially that last one, because kids on social media, all they're being bombarded with is vanity. And what do you look like right now? And how cool do you look? And look at this, version of me and this version of me. And look how cool I am. And they're looking at themselves and they're like, well, I don't feel this cool. And then they feel like there's something really wrong with them. And in fact, their entire focus is wrong. And that's what's causing them to have this false sense of themselves and a lack of fulfillment in who they are and lack of understanding. And kids are confused. And if you don't give them something to cling to and something to understand the world with, they're going to look for answers in all the wrong places.
All right. So now coming to the end now, this is a teaching podcast also. So if you can give parents of a teenage child, if you can give them your best 3 pieces of advice to help their children navigate the world that we live in, what would be your best 3 pieces of advice?
Number 1, pray for them. If you're not praying for your kids, who is? And we know that God, likes to operate through prayer. He wants us to ask him for things, so we can be part of the solution to our own problems if you want. So number 1, pray for them. Number 2, listen to them. You can't just do all the talking, and you've got to, in order to listen to them, you've got to actually sit down with them, take some time, take them where they're at and let them talk to you. My wife spends hours and hours and hours every day just listening to my kids. Even as adults, the kids will call her and talk to her for hours because she's such a great listener. And, when kids feel like their parents are actually listening and truly trying to get them, they're going to be more likely to tell you stuff. And then number 3 is, I think you need to be honest enough to talk to them. Talk to them about your own life, about your own mistakes, about sometimes the tough things you might need to tell them about themselves that, maybe they don't, want to hear, but they need to hear it from somebody who loves them, And so pray for them, listen to them, and talk to them. Pretty simple stuff.
Right. I love it. So the last 2 questions I have, normally it's only 1, but because of you, it's 2. Okay. We live in New Jersey. We have an amazing governor. So
I live in Florida. My governor's terrible.
Oh, yeah, we're not going to get on politics.
I'm just kidding, by the way.
And plus, I'm a Miami Hurricane fan, and you're a Gator fan. So, we'll talk about that another time when we get together. But we live in a crazy world where we're busy all the time, no matter what's our phones, work, whatever. So, if I ask somebody to take an actionable step in 7 days, they're never going to get to it. But if somebody's listening to our show and I ask him to do something in 24 hours, they're more likely to do it. So I'm going to ask you a 2-pronged question. Okay. If there's somebody out there right now that maybe wants to write their own book, maybe want to start that business when they get out. What can they do in the next 24 hours to start to maybe get some headway? And then the second question is, because I believe that if you're not close to God, you're the one that moved. He's always there for you. But if there's somebody that's struggling with their faith, what can they do in the next 24 hours to start to find some peace? Those are easy questions.
Oh, yeah, super simple. Actually, they are super simple. Number one, for those aspiring writers who are just trying to figure out where to even start, join a writing group. And if you're a faith-based writer, there's the Catholic Writers Guild that I belong to. There's the American Fiction Christian Writers Association. There's a lot of different groups out there. Mystery writers. Join a group and start interacting with other writers. For me, that made 100% of the difference. I would not have gotten a contract with Loyola Press. I wouldn't have 6, 7 books now coming out if I wasn't interacting with other writers who are willing to mentor you, network with you, get you in touch with editors and publishers. It meant 100% of everything. So that's easy. You can go online, find a writing group in your community or even an online writers group. You're going to join it. Yeah, it's going to be 40, 50, 60 bucks a year or something. It'll be money well worth spending. And you can do that easily in 24 hours. To your second question, what can you do in 24 hours if you're struggling with your faith? Like you said, God is always there. And you can, in 1 second, turn to God and just say, hey, God, I know I haven't talked to you in a while. I know I screwed everything up, and just pour your heart out to God right here. You can do that in 1 second. But I think, talk to somebody who is a faithful person. If you're a Catholic, you can go to your priest and get confession, and immediately you're back in the game and going to church and this kind of thing. If you're not Catholic, if you're Christian or some other religion, go to your faith person who, somebody you trust. If it's not an official pastor, just a friend that is a faithful friend, and just talk to them. Trust me, it's not often enough that people of faith are approached by their friends saying, hey, can you tell me more about how do I get my faith back? They will be glad to talk to you. And you'll be glad you talked to them, and you'll learn a lot about their own struggles, and you'll realize you're not alone in your struggles.
I love it. So now, how do we find you? How do we support your mission? And where do we find these amazing books?
All right. Well, first of all, since you rub elbows with millionaires and billionaires, if any of them would like to produce a movie series or a Netflix series or something based on the Harwood Mysteries, which have won over 10 book awards, by the way, please send them my way, because I would love to get funding for that. But if you're not a millionaire,
matter of fact, I had a friend of mine that came on. He just directed an amazing motion picture with Ron Perlman in it. So I'm actually going to throw that. I'm going to throw
there
that
you
book.
go.
I'll throw that book his way.
I'm just waiting. Yeah, you know what? I'll send him free copies of everything, for him to look at. But yeah, no, but in a more serious vein, if they want to find my books, they can, of course, find them on Amazon or Barnes & Noble, christianbook.com, or any of those places. You can go to my website, which is antonykolenc.com. I have no H in my first name. And that's ANTONYKOLENC.com. I have links to all my books, to everything else on there, to my podcast. My podcast is The Shepherd's Pie. It comes on once a week, and it focuses on issues that impact youth. So I interview a lot of authors and youth ministers and people about different issues that impact our youth. So that's great. You can find that on Spotify or anywhere else. But yeah, just the typical places. The main thing is getting my name spelled right, Kolenc. There's very few of us out there, so if you put Kolenc in, you're bound to find me on Google.
Yep, and also, guys, make sure you follow him on Facebook, also on LinkedIn. Amazing profile on LinkedIn, so make sure you do that. So, guys, and I just want to say, brother, thank you. I'm so grateful. I can't wait for you whenever you come to Jersey. Come over to the house, have dinner, have a cookout. chill out at the house and bring the beautiful family with you.
Yeah, we need to do that. Yeah, next time, Andrew knows I'm coming, we need to hook something up and do a family gathering.
Definitely. So, guys, make sure you check him out. Make sure you check out his book. Like I said, his first one is the only book like that I've ever read. And out of my 6,000 books, 5,999 of them aren't like that. But that one book I cherish. So, and I'm probably going to get the whole series together because now you got me hooked. But guys, I just want to say thank you so much for always showing up. As you guys know, I'm a big Joel Osteen guy, and I believe that you can either be a victim or the victor. Please choose to be the victor today and stop being the victim. I love you guys. Antony, have a great week, brother. It was amazing talking to you.
Thank you. You too, Richard. God bless you.
All right, guys, remember vertical momentum. The only way to go is up, and I will check you out next week. Love you guys.